welcome to my final episode here on Everything Art TV. I really hope you've enjoyed all of the different lettering styles that we've been through together so far. And for this final episode, I wanted to do a kind of celebration of all of those different lettering styles and find a way of combining them all into one lettered piece. So it's time to dig out your brush pens, gel pens, watercolours, dip pens, anything you fancy. Have a look through some of the different lettering projects and styles that you really like, and we're going to have a go at combining all of those into one fun piece. And I also want the lettering piece that you do from this episode to be a celebration of you. So I want it to be about all of the good things that make you who you are. So that could be your values, your beliefs, your passion, where you show kindness to other people, your talents, your skills, absolutely anything. So just a piece which celebrates all of the lettering styles and all of the amazing things about you. And you can do this in any way you want, but I'll be going through a really fun process of how I like to try and combine some different lettering styles so they look fun and quirky with each other but still tie in a really nice way. So I hope you have loads of fun watching this episode, and most importantly, I hope you get creating and lettering in your own journal. For the piece that I'm creating today, I'm going to be using some A4 paper, and the paper that I'm using is some mixed media paper, which is 200 GSM, because I know I want to use lots of different types of mediums for all of my lettering styles, but you could definitely work smaller and do this in a journal and it'd be absolutely fine. So I'm going to be creating a circle on my page and turn it into a spiral. So I'm going to be using a compass, pencil and eraser to get started. And later on I want to turn this into a flower. So I'm going to find where I want my central point for my circle to be, mark it with a cross, which will just help when I'm doing the circles. But I want to make sure I leave enough space to add some petals later on. If you don't have a compass, you could definitely try and find some things like plates and bowls of various sizes to draw around, because you don't need to be too precise with this in terms of any kinds of measurements at all. So I'm going to start off with my first circle. And I might bring out another one outside now I've seen how far it goes. I'm doing all of these lines reasonably faintly, and I will be erasing them later on. And the more lines you add, obviously the more lettering you're going to be able to add, because we're going to put those right inside each of these circles. And I'm going to bring one into here. I'm not going to go in too tight because this will form the centre of the flower later on. So that's my circles drawn. I've done 1, 2, 3, or 5. And now what I want to do is start bringing these in so that we get a spiral effect. So from roughly the middle point here, going across from that centre cross, I'm going to bring that around to here. And again, don't ever worry about anything being too precise with these, because the effect's going to be absolutely brilliant and quirky and fun at the end. So anything precise, you don't need to worry about that. I'm going to bring that in. Bring those in. And then I'm just going to erase. I'm going to leave the outside circle there because I want that one to stay. But I'm just going to erase the circles from the top of here down to that centre point, the original ones that I drew with the compass. So then hopefully what you're left with is lots of circles on your page coming into a spiral. I'll hold that up a little closer because I know pencil's hard to see on camera. But I hope you can get a feel there for what I've done with all of the spiral lines coming around. And now we're going to start adding some lettering, and I would advise starting this off in pencil and thinking about the things that make you really special or that bring you alive. And I'm going to vary the different writing styles, and I'm going to start right in this left-hand point here. And it can be quite helpful to start with some kind of joined up writing here. And one of the things you want to do is make sure that each part of your lettering touches the top and bottom of the circle. Because we're going to erase these lines later on, it's really going to help you out to be able to still see the different shapes and where each of the words begin. So I've started off by adding the word love in a joined up writing. And then I'm going to add creative in a kind of bubble font. And we're then going to come in and ink all of these in using lots of different lettering styles. And when I'm doing this kind of piece, I like to vary each of the words with the font. So I'll probably do joined up, then bubble writing, joined up, bubble writing, because then I can go back over these with either a brush pen, a dip pen, or a normal fine liner and add some colour to them later on. And each of the bubble writing letters we could decorate in different ways. So we could add stripes or dots and make sure that we add lots of variety to this so that it's a really lovely, colourful piece. So I've got my creative in there. Then the next thing I'm going to do is again do joined up writing. And this is again where you want to make sure that every part of your letter, even if it puts them out of proportion, goes up to the top and bottom. And I really like the fact that it messes around with your proportions, because I've got a really big A there, because it gives a really fun, quirky effect to your lettering. And it takes off the pressure, I think, of anything being too precise. So you can see then when I get to the G for sharing, I'm going to have to do a small circle at the top and then bring that down underneath. So I'll do one more bit in pencil, then I'll move on to the ink so that you can see a little bit better. I'll add these all the way around. And you're just looking for words or phrases really which sum up everything, all of the good things about you as a person. So have fun with this, celebrate yourself, and really enjoy playing around with lots of different font styles. So you see I've got a big E there. And then we're going to keep doing this all the way around the spiral. And say do it all in pencil first, because then you can go and add any flowers to the letters that you want or any other kinds of decorations before we move on to that inking stage. So I'm going to carry on now adding in all of my words and phrases until I've got all of the spiral complete. But I'm going to leave that centre entirely empty, as it will be the centre of my flower. And doing it in pencil first is great because it also means that you can make sure all of the words that you want are going to fit, and perhaps just play around with the different font styles if you do need to adjust anything, because perhaps you run out of room right when you get towards the centre. So the words that I'm using in my self-love flower, as I'm now going to call it, are love, creative, sharing with others, compassion, family, learning, kindness, laughter, passionate, silly, positive, open and thoughtful. And these are the words that I'd really hope people might use to describe me, or that's how they'd think of me. And these are the things which are most important to me in life. So definitely take a little bit of time to think about which words are right for you, and perhaps jot them down on a piece of paper first. I'm now going to move on to what I think is the really fun part of adding in the inking. And I'm starting off by using a Tombow Fudeonsuke brush pen with a firm nib. For my next word, I'm going to use a Sakura Pigma Micron pen, and I'm going to use this to outline each of the bubble letters in the word creative. And these fine liners are great because they're waterproof, so that means that they shouldn't smudge when I'm adding other mediums for colour. Now, I also decided I wanted this word to be stripy, so I'm adding between 2 and 3 lines on each of the letters. For sharing with others, I'm using that same fine liner pen, and I'm starting off by tracing each of the letters, but I then went back to add some extra downward strokes, and you'll see that more clearly once we get on to adding the colour stage. For compassion, I'm adding some flowers on the top left-hand corner of each of the letters before adding the rest of the outline. So have a think about those different lettering styles that we've covered in the previous episodes and try and add some of those into your writing. The only thing really to bear in mind when doing this is to use as much variety as possible, because that's going to add so much visual interest to your final piece. And you might notice that when I'm using the Fudeonsuke brush pen, because it's quite bold and different looking, I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing that in different places around the flower, so that they're not all going to be in one line when you look at it. Something that I absolutely love about this type of project is that you really don't need loads of supplies to create something absolutely stunning. You could even leave it in black and white if you wanted to, and I think that would look absolutely lovely. Now that all of the inking is done, I'm going to move on to adding some colour. But before doing that, I do erase all of those pencil lines. And as I mentioned, you could just leave this in black and white. But I'm going to use a variety of different pens, and I'm going to stick to mainly a colour palette using pinks, purples, blues and a little green. If you are going to turn your design into a flower, it's worth thinking about what colour you want to use on the petals and trying to use some of those same colours in your decoration, because that will just help it all to tie in together. And that's one of the reasons I will be using a little bit of green to tie in with the stem. So the first pen I'm using is a Zebra mildliner brush pen in a pink colour. And I'm just adding that to every other one of the stripes on the word creative. For my next phrase, I'm going to use a light blue Sakura Gelly Roll pen, and these work really well on top of mixed media paper. And I'm using this to colour in those thick downward strokes where I did the faux calligraphy. And that's one of the really fun things with faux calligraphy, is it does give you those extra lines to be able to colour in. And another option that you could consider is just using only one colour, and that will give you a really bold piece. But I wanted to go for something bright, quirky and fun looking, so I'm going to use a range of different mediums, but please do just use whatever you have. I'm now using another mildliner brush pen to colour in the word compassion, and I've used a green gel pen for the flowers on the top of each letter. At this stage, I'm already loving seeing it come to life, and I think it's such a fun project to do because it really doesn't have to take you very long at all. And I really hope that yours turns into a wonderful celebration of everything about you, whether you're doing it on some paper or in your journal. And another thing that I think this type of project is wonderful for is creating something like this as a gift to give to a family member or friend. So you could think about all of the things that you feel about that person and create them a really beautiful piece of art, perhaps as a postcard or greeting cards, so you can send it to them for them to know exactly how you feel about them. For the word family, I'm using a really light green pen, and I wanted this word to stand out a little more as it's one of the most important things to me, and I like that it's going to be in a slightly different colour palette to the rest of my words. For learning, I'm going to use 2 different coloured gel pens. So I'm using this first one along the top half of each of the letters, and then I'm going to use a purple shade along the bottom. And to finish them off, I'll then use a white gel pen to add a highlight on top of each of the letters. So just have fun with this. Think of as many different ways as you can to add decorations to your letters. Any type of felt tip pens would be fine, or paint markers, alcohol markers, depending on what paper you're using, pencils, watercolours. Just have loads of fun with it. You'll notice with a piece like this that even if some of your pencil lines were a little bit wonky in the beginning when you did the spirals, or you feel some of your lettering was a bit wonky, it really doesn't show up on a piece like this. It won't disrupt the overall look of it at all because it is such a quirky piece. And I find that so relaxing because it takes the pressure off some of the more precise lettering pieces that you might previously have been working on. For the word laughter, I've added some dots inside my words. And so these are circles that I've coloured in with one coloured brush pen, and I'm using a purple Tombow ABT brush pen for the rest of the colour. I mentioned earlier that I used a white gel pen, and it's a Uniball Signo gel pen, and I find them so helpful for adding highlights to my lettering. But also, if you do accidentally smudge something or there's a small mistake, you can often get away with using that gel pen to just hide any of those little marks. For my word silly, I'm just adding some dashed lines to look almost like stitching. And I'm also then going to use a grey brush pen to add some shadowing underneath. For the word open, I'm using a pink zebra mildliner brush pen. And I'm then going to use that white gel pen again to add 3 dots to each of the letters. So we're nearly at the end of the stage of adding the decoration to the lettering, and I hope that this has given you lots of fun ideas for how you could decorate your own. But please do feel free to go absolutely wild, decorate it in any way you like with any kind of colour palette which you find really appealing. So remember, this is a piece to celebrate everything about you, and adding your own creative style and colours to it will make it even better. Now that the lettering is complete, I'm going to work on turning this into a flower. And I'm using a pencil to lightly sketch the shape of some petals all the way around the outside. And once that first row is done, I will then add a second row of petals behind it. And you could pick any type of flower shape that you like, depending on how much space you have. And another really fun option is to consider turning it into a sun. And I've done that before, so rather than adding all of the petals around the outside, I've decided to go for lots of rays of sunshine in beautiful yellows and oranges. And you can see here I'm just drawing each of the petals from the centre of one to the next. Again, don't worry about this being too precise, some of the petal sizes being slightly different. It's just going to add to the overall charm of your piece. I'm finishing off by adding a stem and one big bold leaf coming out of the side. I'm going for a really simple flower and leaf because I don't want to distract too much from the lettering in the middle, but you could of course add as much detail as you like. I'm now going to use my Pigma Micron pen to ink in each of the petals and the stem and leaf. And I know that I'm going to be using watercolour, so again it's really important for me to make sure that the pen I'm using is going to be completely waterproof. If you're using something like pencil to add your colour, then you don't need to worry so much about what type of black pen you use. Once you've learned to make your lettering look more quirky by working inside different widths of lines and having to change how you would normally form the shape of your letters, you can use this in all types of your lettering projects. So rather than just working in straight lines, you could use those pencils to create some varied thicknesses and different angled lines on any of those lettering works. And then use that to help shape the different size and form of your letters. And it brings a really quirky feel to your letters, but is so nice and easy to do. Now that all of the inking of the flower is complete, I'm going to erase the pencil lines before moving on to adding some beautiful colour. Right in the centre of my flower, I'm going to add some little dashed lines, And I'm going to make sure that this forms a circle, but not take it quite up to the edge of my lettering, because I know that some of the pens, like the brush pen and the gel pen, aren't going to cope so well when I'm adding watercolour in there. So I want to make sure that no water is going to touch any of those other letters. The watercolour paints that I'm going to be using are from London Gifties, but absolutely any type of watercolour paint would be fine for this. And of course you could also use your brush pens and scribble with them on some plastic packaging and add some water to those if you want to be able to create a lovely watercolour effect but don't have any paints. I'm using a ceramic mixing palette, and I'm going to get the colours that I want to use mixed up in advance, because I want to make sure that those paints are going to be able to mix in with each other on the petals. So I'm picking a really light purple and then a blue. And I'm adding quite a lot of water to these as I want a nice wet mix when it comes to the painting. I'm also mixing up a green coloured paint so that I've got that ready to use for the stem and the leaf. I'm using an Escoda watercolour paintbrush, but any is absolutely fine. And I'm going to start off by using that light purple paint inside the petal. And again, I'm making sure that I don't go too close to any of the lettered pieces. And I'm then dropping a little of that blue paint right on the top of the petal while the purple paint is still wet. And I'm going to allow that to just do its thing and mix in to the purple paint underneath it. And that'll give you a really interesting effect to your petals rather than it feeling too flat. It will also help to separate your first row of petals from your second. And each of the petals are going to look slightly different depending on how much of the two colours you add. And I love that. I'm not looking for anything uniform here, just having fun and letting the paint play and do its own thing. One simple tip at this stage is to keep turning your painting around to make sure that the paint that you're adding is as close as possible to your palette, because you really don't want to risk taking your paintbrush over your lettering and maybe accidentally dropping some water or paint and smudging those letters. So I'm very carefully adding some of the light blue paint to the centre of the flower, but say just be careful not to smudge any of that gorgeous lettering, because that would be such a shame at this point. So I'm just going to carry on now doing exactly the same, adding those two colour paints to each of the petals until all of the flower is complete. Before moving on to adding paint to your stem and leaf, it's definitely a good idea to make sure that the paint on the petals is completely dry. So you could either leave it for a little while or use a heat tool just to dry off any of that paint. I'm only going to use one shade of green paint for the leaf and the stem, but I do want there to be a little variation, so I add some extra paint along the bottom half of the leaf and the right hand side of the stem, just to give that feeling of shading and just to give a little bit more interest. I really hope that you've enjoyed seeing how my self-love flower all came together, and most importantly, I hope you're going to have a go at doing something yourself, really celebrating yourself, having a play with that quirky lettering, and really enjoy adding all the different decorations to your lettering and gaining confidence in your own style. So that's now it. That's my lettering piece, all complete. I absolutely love this type of project, and I find it something that's quite addictive. Once you've made one, you'll just want to do more and more. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you ever so much for watching.